Latvia in the Russian Empire, 1710 to 1917. The capitulation of Estonia and Livonia in 1710 and the Treaty of Nystad, ending the Great Northern War in 1721, gave Vidzeme to Russia. It became part of the Riga Governorate. The Latgal region remained part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as in Flandry Voivodeship until 1772, when it was incorporated into Russia. The Duchy of Kurland and Semiglia became an autonomous Russian province, the Kurland Governorate, in 1795, bringing all of what is now Latvia into the Russian Empire. All three Baltic provinces preserved local laws, German as the local official language and their own parliament, the Landtag. During the Great Northern War, 1700 to 1721, up to 40% of Latvians died from famine and plague. Half the residents of Riga were killed by plague in 1710 to 1711. The emancipation of the serfs took place in Kurland in 1817 and in Vidzeme in 1819. In practice, however, the emancipation was actually advantageous to the landowners and nobility, as it dispossessed peasants of their land without compensation, forcing them to return to work at the estates of their own free will. During the 19th century, the social structure changed dramatically. Citation needed, a class of independent farmers established itself after reforms allowed the peasants to repurchase their land, but many landless peasants remained. There also developed a growing urban proletariat and an increasingly influential Latvian bourgeoisie. The Young Latvian, John Latviesi, movement laid the groundwork for nationalism from the middle of the century, many of its leaders looking to the Slavophiles for support against the prevailing German-dominated social order. The rise and use of the Latvian language in literature and society became known as the First National Awakening. Russification began in Latgal after the Polish led the January Uprising in 1863, this spread to the rest of what is now Latvia by the 1880s. The Young Latvians were largely eclipsed by the new current, a broad leftist social and political movement, in the 1890s. Popular discontent exploded in the 1905 Russian Revolution, which took a nationalist character in the Baltic provinces. During these 2 centuries Latvia experienced economic and construction boom, ports were expanded, Riga became the largest port in the Russian Empire, railways built, new factories, banks, and a university were established, many residential, public, theaters and museums, and school buildings were erected, new parks formed, and so on. Riga's boulevards and some streets outside the Old Town date from this period. Declaration of Independence. World War I devastated the territory of what became the state of Latvia, and other western parts of the Russian Empire. Demands for self-determination were initially confined to autonomy, until a power vacuum was created by the Russian Revolution in 1917, followed by the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk between Russia and Germany in March 1918. Then the Allied armistice with Germany on November 11, 1918. On November 18, 1918, in Riga, the People's Council of Latvia proclaimed the independence of the new country, with Karlis Ulmanis becoming the head of the provisional government. The War of Independence that followed was part of a general chaotic period of civil and new border wars in Eastern Europe. By the spring of 1919, there were actually 3 governments: Ulmanis's government, the Latvian Soviet government led by Peter Staka, whose forces, supported by the Red Army, occupied almost all of the country, and the Baltic German government of the United Baltic Duchy, headed by Andrei Evsniydra and supported by the Baltislandsver and the German Freikorps Unit Iron Division. Estonian and Latvian forces defeated the Germans at the Battle of Wunden in June 1919, and a massive attack by a predominantly German force, The West Russian Volunteer Army, under Pavel Bermontavalov, was repelled in November. Eastern Latvia was cleared of Red Army forces by Latvian and Polish troops in early 1920. From the Polish perspective, the Battle of Daugavpils was a part of the Polish-Soviet War. A freely elected Constituent Assembly convened on May 1, 1920, and adopted a liberal constitution, the Satversum, in February 1922. The constitution was partly suspended by Kārlis Ulmanis after his coup in 1934 but reaffirmed in 1990. Since then, it has been amended and is still in effect in Latvia today. With most of Latvia's industrial base evacuated to the interior of Russia in 1915, radical land reform was the central political question for the young state. In 1897, 61.2% of the rural population had been landless. By 1936, that percentage had been reduced to 18%. By 1923, the extent of cultivated land surpassed the pre-war level. Innovation and rising productivity led to rapid growth of the economy, but it soon suffered from the effects of the Great Depression. Latvia showed signs of economic recovery, and the electorate had steadily moved toward the center during the parliamentary period. Citation needed: on May 15, 1934, Ulmanis staged a bloodless coup, establishing a nationalist dictatorship that lasted until 1940. After 1934, Ulmanis established government corporations to buy up private firms with the aim of Latvianizing the economy. Latvia in World War II. Early in the morning of August 24, 1939, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed a 10-year non-aggression pact, called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The pact contained a secret protocol, revealed only after Germany's defeat in 1945, according to which the states of Northern and Eastern Europe were divided into German and Soviet spheres of influence. In the north, Latvia, Finland and Estonia were assigned to the Soviet sphere. A week later, on September 1, 1939, Germany and on 17 September, the Soviet Union invaded Poland. After the conclusion of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, most of the Baltic Germans left Latvia by agreement between Ulmanis' government and Nazi Germany under the Heimansreich program. In total 50,000 Baltic Germans left by the deadline of December 1939, with 1,600 remaining to conclude business and 13,000 choosing to remain in Latvia. Most of those who remained left for Germany in summer 1940, when a second resettlement scheme was agreed. The racially approved being resettled mainly in Poland, being given land and businesses in exchange for the money they had received from the sale of their previous assets. On October 5, 1939, Latvia was forced to accept a mutual assistance pact with the Soviet Union, granting the Soviets the right to station between 25,000 and 30,000 troops on Latvian territory. State administrators were liquidated and replaced by Soviet cadres. Elections were held with single pro-Soviet candidates listed for many positions. The resulting People's Assembly immediately requested admission into the USSR, which the Soviet Union granted. Latvia, then a puppet government, was headed by August Kernsteins. The Soviet Union incorporated Latvia on August 5, 1940, as the Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic. The Soviets dealt harshly with their opponents. Prior to Operation Barbarossa, in less than a year, at least 34,250 Latvians were deported or killed. Most were deported to Siberia, where deaths were estimated at 40%, officers of the Latvian army being shot on the spot. On June 21, 1941, German troops attacked Soviet forces in Operation Barbarossa. There were some spontaneous uprisings by Latvians against the Red Army which helped the Germans. By 29 June Riga was reached, and with Soviet troops killed, captured or retreating, Latvia was left under the control of German forces by early July. The occupation was followed immediately by SS Einsatzgruppen troops who were to act in accordance with the Nazi Generalplanost, which required the population of Latvia to be cut by 50%. Under German occupation, Latvia was administered as part of Reichskommissariat Ostland. Latvian paramilitary and auxiliary police units established by the occupation authority participated in the Holocaust and other atrocities. 30,000 Jews were shot in Latvia in the autumn of 1941. Another 30,000 Jews from the Riga ghetto being killed in the Rumbula forest in November and December 1941, to reduce overcrowding in the ghetto and make room for more Jews being brought in from Germany and the West. There was a pause in fighting, apart from partisan activity, until after the siege of Leningrad ended in January 1944 and the Soviet troops advanced, entering Latvia in July and eventually capturing Riga on October 13, 1944. More than 200,000 Latvian citizens died during World War II, including approximately 75,000 Latvian Jews murdered during the Nazi occupation. Latvian soldiers fought on both sides of the conflict, mainly on the German side, with 140,000 men in the Latvian Legion of the Waffen-SS. The 308th Latvian Rifle Division was formed by the Red Army in 1944. On occasions, especially in 1944, opposing Latvian troops faced each other in battle. Activity reaching a peak in late 1946. Soviet era, 1940 to 41, 1944 to 91. In 1944, when Soviet military advances reached the area, heavy fighting took place in Latvia between German and Soviet troops, which ended in another German defeat. In the course of the war, both occupying forces conscripted Latvians into their armies, in this way increasing the loss of the nation's live resources. In 1944, part of the Latvian territory once more came under Soviet control. The Soviets immediately began to reinstate the Soviet system. After the German surrender, it became clear that Soviet forces were there to stay, and Latvian national partisans, soon joined by German collaborators, began to fight against the new occupier. Anywhere from 120,000 to as many as 300,000 Latvians took refuge from the Soviet army by fleeing to Germany and Sweden. Most sources count 200,000 to 250,000 refugees leaving Latvia, with perhaps as many as 80,000 to 100,000 of them recaptured by the Soviets or, during few months immediately after the end of war, returned by the West. The Soviets reoccupied the country in 1944 to 45, and further deportations followed as the country was collectivized and Sovietized. On March 25, 1949, 43,000 rural residents, kulaks, and Latvian patriots, nationalists, were deported to Siberia in a sweeping Operation Preboy in all three Baltic states, which was carefully planned and approved in Moscow already on January 29, 1949. 55. This operation had the desired effect of reducing the anti-Soviet partisan activity. Between 136,000 and 190,000 Latvians, depending on the sources, were imprisoned, repressed or deported to Soviet concentration camps, the Gulag, in the post-war years, from 1945 to 1952. Some managed to escape arrest and join the partisans. In the post-war period, Latvia was made to adopt Soviet farming methods. Rural areas were forced into collectivization. An extensive program to impose bilingualism was initiated in Latvia, limiting the use of Latvian language in official uses in favor of using Russian as the main language. All of the minority schools, Jewish, Polish, Belarusian, Estonian, Lithuanian, were closed down, leaving only two media of instructions in the schools, Latvian and Russian. 58. An influx of laborers, administrators, military personnel and their dependents from Russia and other Soviet republics started. By 1959 about 400,000 people arrived from other Soviet republics and the ethnic Latvian population had fallen to 62%. Since Latvia had maintained a well-developed infrastructure and educated specialists, Moscow decided to base some of the Soviet Union's most advanced manufacturing in Latvia. New industry was created in Latvia, including a major machinery factory RAF in Jelgava, electrotechnical factories in Riga, chemical factories in Daugavpils, Valmiera and Olane, and some food and oil processing plants. Latvia manufactured trains, ships, minibuses, mopeds, telephones, radios and hi-fi systems, electrical and diesel engines, textiles, furniture, clothing, bags and luggage, shoes, musical instruments, home appliances, watches, tools and equipment, aviation and agricultural equipment and long list of other goods. Latvia had its own film industry and musical records factory, LPs. However, there were not enough people to operate the newly built factories. To maintain and expand industrial production, skilled workers were migrating from all over the Soviet Union, decreasing the proportion of ethnic Latvians in the republic. Population of Latvia reached its peak in 1990 at just under 2.7 million people. Restoration of independence in 1991. In the second half of the 1980s, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev started to introduce political and economic reforms in the Soviet Union that were called Glasnost and Perestroika. In the summer of 1987, the first large demonstrations were held in Riga at the Freedom Monument, a symbol of independence. In the summer of 1988, a national movement, coalescing in the Popular Front of Latvia, was opposed by the Interfront. The Latvian SSR, along with the other Baltic republics, was allowed greater autonomy, and in 1988, the old pre-war flag of Latvia flew again, replacing the Soviet Latvian flag as the official flag in 1990. In 1989, the Supreme Soviet of the USSR adopted a resolution on the occupation of the Baltic states, in which it declared the occupation not in accordance with law, and not the will of the Soviet people. Pro-independence Popular Front of Latvia candidates gained a two-thirds majority in the Supreme Council in the March 1990 democratic elections. On May 4, 1990, the Supreme Council adopted the Declaration on the Restoration of Independence of the Republic of Latvia, and the Latvian SSR was renamed Republic of Latvia. However, the Central Power in Moscow continued to regard Latvia as a Soviet republic in 1990 and 1991. Citation needed. In January 1991, Soviet political and military forces tried unsuccessfully to overthrow the Republic of Latvia authorities by occupying the Central Publishing House in Riga and establishing a Committee of National Salvation to usurp governmental functions. Citation needed. During the transitional period, Moscow maintained many Central Soviet state authorities in Latvia. In spite of this, 73% of all Latvian residents confirmed their strong support for independence on March 3, 1991, in a non-binding advisory referendum. Citation needed. The Popular Front of Latvia advocated that all permanent residents be eligible for Latvian citizenship. However, universal citizenship for all permanent residents was not adopted. Instead, citizenship was granted to persons who had been citizens of Latvia at the day of loss of independence at 1940 as well as their descendants. As a consequence, The majority of ethnic non-Latvians did not receive Latvian citizenship since neither they nor their parents had ever been citizens of Latvia, becoming non-citizens or citizens of other former Soviet republics. By 2011, more than half of non-citizens had taken naturalization exams and received Latvian citizenship. Still, today there are 290,660 non-citizens in Latvia, which represent 14.1% of population. They have no citizenship of any country, and cannot vote in Latvia. The Republic of Latvia declared the end of the transitional period and restored full independence on August 21, 1991, in the aftermath of the failed Soviet coup attempt. Latvia became a member of the European Union in 2004 and signed the Lisbon Treaty in 2007. The Saeima, Latvia's parliament, was again elected in 1993. Russia ended its military presence by completing its troop withdrawal in 1994 and shutting down the Skrandal 1 radar station in 1998. The major goals of Latvia in the 1990s, to join NATO and the European Union, were achieved in 2004. The NATO Summit 2006 was held in Riga. Language and citizenship laws have been opposed by many Russophones. Citizenship was not automatically extended to former Soviet citizens who settled during the Soviet occupation, or to their offspring. Children born to non-nationals after the re-establishment of independence are automatically entitled to citizenship. Approximately 72% of Latvian citizens are Latvian, while 20% are Russian, less than 1% of non-citizens are Latvian, while 71% are Russian. 62. The government denationalized private property confiscated by the Soviets, returning it or compensating the owners for it, and privatized most state-owned industries, reintroducing the pre-war currency. Albeit having experienced a difficult transition to a liberal economy and its reorientation towards Western Europe, Latvia is one of the fastest growing economies in the European Union. In 2014, Riga was the European capital of culture. The euro was introduced as the currency of the country and a Latvian was named Vice President of the European Commission. In 2015 Latvia held the presidency of Council of the European Union. Big European events have been celebrated in Riga such as the Eurovision Song Contest 2003 and the European Film Awards 2014.